There are two players that I continue to watch. If the 53-man roster came out today, I would be shocked to see either of these guys not on that list. Welcome into the Hot Read Podcast for Friday, August 4th. I'm your host, Easton Freeze, director of published content here at BroadwaySportsMedia.com. We're also brought to you by the 440 Podcast Network. And I'm joined, as always, by producer JT. JT, how are you?
I'm good. I'm from a very different location today and will be...
He's remote today.
I am remote today and will be remote for the rest of the week or so. In a different location after this next time, moving all across the country right now.
Did they put you in witness protection program? What are we doing?
I think so. I think that's what's happening.
Is that what it is? I got you.
But I am excited because today is Kellen Mond versus Zach Wilson day. Super excited for that.
Yes, it is Sicko Football Day. The worst football of the year is the first football of the year. The Hall of Fame game tonight. Like you said, yes. Zach Wilson, Kellen Mond, a titanic showdown that should be delicious for all the thousands of us that are we're just desperate, starving, sick individuals that will take any little morsel of football.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but I am so excited for the Dorian Thompson-Robinson legacy second half tonight for the Browns.
Right.
I will personally be hammering the Browns plus 1.5 line tonight because of that fact.
It's one thing to watch this. It's another thing to bet on this.
Hey,
you're going full bore.
Preseason for bettors too. It's not just the players, man.
You got to get
warm.
Us
too. You got to get warm. So totally will be doing that tonight. Totally just not a joke, but excited to watch it. Unfortunately, apparently it's only on Peacock. So I guess I got to go out and get a free trial for Peacock tonight, I guess. So we'll figure that out. So
yeah, we'll see how that works throughout the season. I'm sure there are plenty of folks that are not quite sure what to do about that and will begrudgingly end up getting it. If you want to be a part of the conversation today and you're joining us live, which we're about 30 minutes past when we said we'd be live, I had some technical difficulties that were we were further delayed after that because of a rather unfortunate timing for a Titans news dump, the breaking news. If you're with us live on the Thursday of recording today's episode, the Titans have released offensive tackle Jamarco Jones. Going to get into all of that, what led to the release, what this means for the team going forward in just one moment. But if you are with us live, like D Good and Kenneth and Pretty Boy Lipschitz are in the comment section, we would love for you, if you're not watching via YouTube, go on over to the YouTube page at Broadway Sports Media on YouTube. You'll find this live stream and be able to, in the comments of that live stream, comment like D Good and Kenneth and Pretty Boy Lipschitz and be a part of the conversation, which we would love to. Hey, and we got Stoney Keeley with the Sobros Network here as well.
Happy
Stoney,
10th,
by the way,
Stoney.
Looking forward to Saturday night's soiree. I will be there. JT, unfortunately, out of town, but I will be representing the show and cannot wait to celebrate Sobros' 10th anniversary, I believe it is, which is fantastic and cannot wait for that. But we'll get to all of that in a minute. First, I have the warm-up to get into, and then we'll have some Titans news on the back end with producer JT, and we will get out of here because we are on a time crunch today, but plenty of good stuff to talk about. So let me not waste any more time and dive right in to today's warm-up, JT, and it's the premise of which is based on a conversation that I was having at Titans training camp today with our buddy Sam Phelan over at A to Z Sports. And we were talking about who does DeAndre Hopkins' arrival to this team impact the most. Now, we've talked a lot about what it does for guys like Treylon Burks and how DeAndre Hopkins may very well be a force multiplier in his production and efficacy this season for the Titans. But there are a couple of players that I think you could argue DeAndre Hopkins doesn't hurt by arriving, certainly may help them in the same way that he's helping Treylon Burks, taking the attention away from them, maybe giving them some more easy opportunities and so on and so forth. But for who does his arrival impact the most negatively in terms of the stat sheet or, what we're expecting from them in terms of the volume of their production this season? And there's a couple of players to keep in mind here, but we were kind of doing the math on this, and I want to walk through it with you and with our listeners and see what we might come up with, because I think it's fair now that DeAndre Hopkins is here and has solidified himself as not just a member of this team, but seemingly, I mean, he's not, for a guy that doesn't like to practice, he sure has not missed a single practice since being here. I mean, I'm there every day, and he's been there every day, and he's been practicing. And it's not the whole veteran, like, oh, yeah, I'm going to come out to warm up and stretch and then head. No. He's there start to finish. And so he certainly seems like a guy that is ready to go full time. And as long as he is healthy, be a massive, massive part of this offense. And so I wanted to reevaluate a little bit where these skill position players fall on the list of our expectations for the year. Because JT, you and I spent a lot of the dog days of summer and a lot of the spring talking about the breakout candidates, the roles we expected from guys like Chig Okonkwo, guys like Kyle Phillips, guys like NWI and Chris Moore and all these guys. So I want to talk about them. And let's just kind of start from the top here and do the math and kind of whittle our way down to how many yards we expect to be out there for these guys, right? So let's start with the supply of yards available to the skill position players in the passing game. That, of course, comes from the arm of Ryan Tannehill. Again, knock on wood, God willing, he will be out there all season long for the Titans. We want all starting quarterbacks for all teams to be out there because backup quarterback football sucks to watch for everybody. So as long as Ryan Tannehill is out there this season, looking at his stats from the past to get an idea of what a fair and reasonable estimate is for what kind of passing yard volume he will have for this season in the 2 years with the Tennessee Titans that he has played the entire year healthy. Of course, in 2019, he comes in about a third of the way into the season, takes over from Marcus Mariota. Last season, misses a handful, I believe, 5 games, and is dealing with injuries, and a number of games does not look himself because of that ankle. So we've got the 2020 and the 2021 seasons as sample sizes. And in those 2 years, need I remind you, the situation certainly different in a number of different ways. But in terms of the receiving core, the weapons, in 2020, he had the solidified wide receiver 1 and 2 tandem of Corey Davis and A.J. Brown. And then in 2021, despite them not being on the field the entire season, he had the solidified number 1 and number 2 of A.J. Brown and Julio Jones. And in those 2 years, he threw for roughly 3,700 and 3,800 yards combined. So let's use that as our barometer. In his career, Tannehill in 2015 and 14, those 2 seasons, he went back-to-back 4,000-yard passing seasons. With the Dolphins, he was kind of all over the place. His first 2 years in the league, he had 32 and then 3,900 in 2016 and 17, the year he missed due to that ACL injury. 16, just shy of 3,000 yards. So kind of all over the board. And I don't want to take that into consideration. Let's do with what we've seen with him under Mike Vrabel and with the Titans, which is that 38-ish, 37-ish 100-yard mark. I don't think, first of all, just off the top, is it possible for him to have a 4,000-yard receiving yard season? Yes, he's done it twice before in his career. And depending on how this offense looks with Tim Kelly, if they truly are going to be more pass happy than the past couple of iterations of the Titans, maybe he does just eclipse that mark. But I think it's fair to say the conservative estimate is right there at 3,800. Before I go forward, JT, does that sound about right to you? Somewhere between 3,500 and 4,000 yards if he is healthy for this season?
It's probably the most correct that you can be. I would argue that maybe this is, from a talent standpoint, just top to bottom, maybe the most talent that a Titans roster has seen in quite a while. So like you said, there is possibility to go over 4,000 passing yards. However, it probably just because what we know, I mean, we even heard Mike Vrabel today say we got to get our best players the ball. And Derrick Henry is a pretty darn good ball player. So he was not shying away from still trying to emphasize the run game, which makes me think that, from like 3,500 to maybe like 4,000 passing yards is probably a good estimate for Tannehill.
So let's say an average conservative number is 3,800. We've danced around it. Let's just land on that. So 3,800 yards to divide between a handful of skill position players. Let's start with the guys we're expecting to get the most volume, right? It's Treylon Burks. It's DeAndre Hopkins. Maybe this is too optimistic, JT. And of course, injuries and availability, they change the math quickly, right? If I were to bring a time traveler from 6 months from now back in time to join the show as a guest, and they tell us that DeAndre Hopkins and Treylon Burks both play 17 games this season, I think you and I would go take out mortgages on the D-Hop, Traylon Burks combined over 2,000 yards mark. Like, I think that is really safe if you told me they played all 17 games, right? DeAndre Hopkins has been on pace to be a 1,000-yard receiver or significantly better practically for a decade. And Traylon Burks, while last year his totals, I think he was in this, 400 or 500 yard range on the season, played in very few games. In terms of played in very few effective games, should I say. It was that back half of the season where they really cut him loose a little bit, turned him up a little bit, and he got going and got on a roll, and that was marred by a number of stops for injury. So a very small sample size in terms of games for him. We're expecting around 1,000-yard season for him, are we not?
Yes, to your point, I think that 1,000 yards for both of them is pretty doable.
If you tell me that's 1,200 from DeAndre Hopkins and 800 from Burke, like I think it's gonna be 2,000 split up, however which way.
I would agree with that. I saw a tweet the other day from PFF, of course, a classic PFF. Who's stopping this, kind of like that. And it was like, what can DeAndre Hopkins do this year? And I just said, basically, screw it. Here's what I'm projecting DeAndre Hopkins. And I said in the realm, because I was just, looking for some engagement that day or whatever. So I said, but this is, I do stand by it that I think DeAndre Hopkins is probably in the realm of 70 to 75 receptions for around 850 yards and 6 or 7 touchdowns, I think is where I'm realistically landing right now.
Right. And I think I agree. And again, that could come in the iteration of 1,100 yards for Burks, 850 yards for Hopkins. Like 2,000 is not a hard and fast number. If you told me they as a duo turned out with 1,800 yards, or if they turned out with 2,200 yards, give or take 200 yards on that 2,000 number, feels about right for me. So let's just round it off at 2,000. And this if is like this, the Spider-Man meme where he's holding the bus back. That's what if is doing in this circumstance. They both play all the games. Now, based on their track record, just last season, not full career, but for Brooks, it's just one season. We know that the two of these players are liable to miss a game or two, at least. And I think it's reasonable to say, maybe they both play 14 to 15 games this year. Somebody tweaks a hammy, somebody, turns an ankle, whatever it may be. There's a big game at the end of the year, and the penultimate game of the season doesn't matter, and so they hold them out, whatever it looks like. I think that number maybe becomes 1,600, 1,500. It could change dramatically if, God forbid, somebody misses significant time. But let's say that they're right at that 1,800 to 2,000 yard mark on paper. So that takes out a massive chunk of the 3,800 yards we have available. That leaves us with about 1,800 to 2,000 yards left over to divvy up between a number of players not named Traylon Burks and DeAndre Hopkins. Just checking the comments here before we plow forward. Dr. Lipschitz said a birdie told him that they would likely be doing more like a 60% pass, 40% run this year, which sounds in line with what we've been hearing. So I don't doubt that may be the case, at least their plan. We'll see if that changes as they go. Logan asking, is JT okay? He is in an empty room and 300 feet from the camera. Blink twice if you need help, JT. So we've got about, so let's say 1,800 to 2,000 yards available to divide up between non-D-Hop and Burks individuals on this team. We need to consider. I'm gonna leave two players for last. I want to leave Chig and Kyle Phillips for last because those are the two players that previously we have been looking at as like, oh, they may be breakout candidates this season before DeAndre Hopkins arrived. They also have, just one season of a track record, whereas some of these other players have a more significant body of work for us to go based off of. So if we've got 2,000 yards to work with, Chris Moore just last season amassed, and I'm pulling up his stats right now, he amassed just under 550 yards. Now, that was his first season with more than 250 yards. The previous season in Houston, he had 227. And so maybe we say, a conservative estimate, he takes up 300 to 400 of those yards. So now we're down to about 1,600 yards left to give out. Derrick Henry last season was his best receiving season, and they continue to want to utilize him. And Tim Kelly, offensive coordinator for the Titans, told us yesterday that Derrick Henry is essentially still the engine of this team. He's still the focal point of the offense. They're still going to operate through Derrick, whether that is running on the ground for the most part, but also they continue to utilize him in the passing game more and more each year. And in practice, I can tell you for certain, they are looking to pass to him and use him in the screen game. And as we've talked about for a long, long time, JT, the number one, like if you can do one thing with Derrick Henry, you're going to be in good shape as a ball club. If you can get Derrick Henry about 5 steps without being touched, you're going to be in pretty good shape that game. If you can consistently give him 4 to 5 steps without being touched, you're going to be in good shape. And so that's what they try to do in the screen game constantly, and it works to their favor. Whereas last season, he ended up with just 2 yards shy of 400 yards. The previous season, he had 150. So let's say he has about 300 yards receiving this season. Okay, now we're down to about 1,300 yards to give out. Tyjae Spears, we've been talking about it. I expect him to gobble up at least 100 or 200 of those receiving yards. I was going to
say 100, definitely.
If not more. Yeah, let's say 150, 100. Okay, so now we're down to about 1,150-ish yards to give out. NWI last season, looking at his numbers, he's a guy that is for sure making this team. And in the past 2 years, yes, he's gotten some more play because there's been a number of injuries and he's been forced onto the field more than the Titans on paper would like to be. But he's also continuing to get better, and the team is continuing to trust him more, and he's continuing to become more and more of a veteran in that room. And so could he be in line for a similar sample size to the last 2 seasons? I think yes, maybe just a little bit depleted. But in the last 2 years, he's had 475 and 400 yards. So I would say 200 to 300 yards go to him. Let's call it 250. Okay, now we're down to about 900 yards left to hand out. And then you have to consider where Chig and Kyle Phillips fall into that equation. Previously, before DeAndre Hopkins arrived, we were talking about Chig like he could be in that 800 to 1,000 yard receiving territory and be, if he broke out, a top 5 tight end in the league. Again, that was when we were saying, hey guys, Chig Okonkwo may very well be your wide receiver 2 in terms of volume on this team. That's obviously not going to be the case anymore. DeAndre Hopkins is around. They're changing the composition of this team. They're changing the game plan. Kyle Phillips is a guy that before DeAndre Hopkins came, and we've talked about how DeAndre is probably going to play a lot in the slot this year. He's going to probably take some snaps away, maybe significant snaps away from Kyle Phillips. That's going to deplete his workload a lot as well. If I said that there were 900 yards to divide between Chig and Kyle Phillips this season, JT, I know my answer, and I'm guessing it's the same as yours, but just so I don't put the words in your mouth, who would you expect to get the lion's share of that 900-yard pie?
I'm going with Chig.
Yeah, no, I am as well. I think that it would be something like if you told me that they had 900 yards combined, like Chig 650.
That's what I would think too.
Kyle Phillips 250, 600, 300, something like that.
I mean, if you look at last year, like Tyler Higbee had 620 yards, and that was for reference, like even when Chig Okonkwo wasn't being used last year, he still had 450 yards.
On the season.
And
he really was an actual player in about half the games, like half
exactly.
The season.
So
right.
I would expect him to be in that like Dalton Schultz-esque area of like 600 to 700 yards this season.
Yeah. So all of that is to say, and the reason I wanted to make this warm up, I kind of think people need to pump the brakes on Kyle Phillips and Chig Okonkwo this season, more so Kyle Phillips, not because of the talent. Okay. This is not me mental gymnasticsing my way around being high on Kyle Phillips for the past year and a half and trying to find a way to get off of the train without saying that I was wrong. I don't think that I was wrong. I just think that the composition of this team changes. Like Kyle Phillips, I still think is that player and still think is that dude. And I think there's a reality in which he is such a game breaker in certain circumstances that maybe NWI gets kind of knocked off the contributions chart. Maybe Tyjae Spears isn't nearly as effective in year 1 because they're wanting to use Kyle Phillips in the dump off game more than they want to use Tyjae Spears. Maybe Chris Moore as an more elderly wide receiver. First of all, maybe he doesn't stay on the field the whole season, and so a lot of those yards go somewhere else. Or maybe he's not utilized nearly as much as we were once expecting. Again, Treylon Burks, DeAndre Hopkins, not impossible for one or both of them to miss significant time this year, and that becomes a lot of yards available for the taking. So all of that is to say, I think that it's a more conservative year for those two players, but more so Kyle Phillips than we had been talking about beforehand. And so I kind of wanted to just put that math out there to kind of set our expectations. This is going to be a cool thing to maybe revisit at the very end of the year and be like, okay, how did the pieces of the pie really fall? And that's what we can do with this. All right, enough of my rambling on the warm-up today, JT. I know we're on a time crunch here, and we've got a couple of things, a little bit of a different show in terms of a training camp review today. I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty that I've gotten into the past couple of days. I want to really just hit the highlights, and we don't have a ton to share with folks in terms of, like, I don't have any clips today. I decided to not pull any clips. I'm not going to give you drive-by-drive analyses of the different quarterbacks or anything like that. I just want to touch on some topics that are rattling around my brain. You know, we've got 3 or 4 weeks coming up for me to give plenty of those full practice rundowns, and we did that on Tuesday. So if you want one of those, go to Tuesday's episode, and that was a very good practice for that. Today's practice was a little bit different because we started in the pouring rain. I showed up to practice in the rain, in the thundering rain, expecting fully for us to be in the bubble. And so I did not bring an umbrella. I did not bring a raincoat. I was wearing this polo and not a hat. The reason I'm wearing a hat now is because my hair was drenched for most of the day, as was my clothing, because we spent the first 30-ish minutes of practice, maybe a little bit less, out in the pouring rain, which it's obviously not cold in August in Nashville, so not cold rain, but very wet. And Mike Vrabel comes bursting out of that door when we're talking to the position coaches at the beginning of the day with a Lowe's, like Home Depot sized bucket with footballs in it filled with water, which is the universal training camp signal for a wet ball drill. And it's like, oh God, okay, guess we're staying outside today. Cool. Didn't think we'd be doing that. Maybe fortunately for those of us in the media that were getting drenched and didn't have rain jackets, it did start to lightning at the Titans facility. So we had to go into the bubble for the majority of practice, but we got plenty of wet ball drills. And I want to point out one thing on the wet portion of practice today. DeAndre Hopkins is known for his massive hands. JT, I don't know if you're aware of this, but it's pretty well known at this point that dude's got some big old mitts on him. He was doing in the rain something that it looked like he'd done this a number of times before. And I don't know if it's a haha, my hands are way bigger than you fun thing, or this is a good drill for ball security, probably a combination of the two. But he was going player by player in the Titans wide receiver core with a football. And he was challenging guys to kind of a football tug of war with the wet ball in the rain. And with a number of Titans wide receivers, if you want to see a clip of this, a brief video of it, go to my Twitter account at Easton Freeze and you'll find it there. He was one-handed tug of warring a football with like Kyle Phillips and Mason Kinsey holding the ball with two hands, trying to yank this wet football in the rain out of DeAndre Hopkins' one hand and struggling to do so. And so it was a really, really funny juxtaposition between those two things. And just the dude's got some big old paws on him. His wide receiver coach this morning was talking to us. We asked him what's the one thing he didn't quite know about DeAndre Hopkins before DeAndre got to Nashville. And he was like, I knew the dude had big hands, but I didn't know they were that big. And so he and Traylon Burks are definitely members of the all hands team. A couple of other things from practice today. I say a couple of other things. I'm bearing the lead here with the wet football drill hands. I forgot that we had some breaking news right before the show, JT. The Titans have cut offensive tackle Jamarco Jones. And it's funny because we were going to start out the sights and sounds from training camp portion of today's show with a subject I had titled Jamarco Jones trying to slap his way out of a job. Well, he slapped his way out of a job, JT, right as I was typing that. The Titans announced around 3 p.m. on Thursday that they had released Jamarco Jones. Here's the context of this if folks haven't been paying attention to training camp. Jamarco Jones had been taking first-team snaps as the right tackle for the Titans once Nicholas Petit-Frere got suspended and they entered the August portion of training camp. They had very few decent options on the team, Jamarco Jones being one of those decent options. And so they were continuing to get him first team snaps at the right tackle position. And he, frankly, JT, we felt like had a golden opportunity, was perfectly positioned to win himself the starting right tackle job for the first month and a half of the season, at the very least. Like, I thought that he was probably the leader in the clubhouse to do that. We agreed on that, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I've always said that there was a few dark horse candidates, but if you had to pick someone that was probably in line for it, Jamarco Jones was that guy.
And they continued to treat him that way this week when we were in padded practice. To start the practices, he was getting those first team reps. But then in the most recent 2 practices, so today on Thursday and on Tuesday, he did things early on in practice that got him sent off the practice field early and have now ultimately resulted in him losing his job. On Tuesday, Jones was one of the 2 guys in the first fight of training camp. He got into a scuffle with defensive tackle Jeffrey Simmons, and the 2 of them were punished with banishment to the sand pit to work on their technique, which was the prescribed punishment for fighting in training camp. As Mike Vrabel has said, that falls squarely within the dumb shit that hurts the team category, which he likes to point out constantly in his media availability. And so the 2 of them got really on I think the 3rd or 4th play of practice on Tuesday, banished to the sand pit, and they didn't get to return for team drills until much later on in practice. Then today at Thursday's practice, he started out again inside the bubble during 11s and 7s, or not 7s. Linemen aren't on for 7s. That's the whole point. During 11s, and it wasn't as early on, but it was certainly in the first 20 minutes of practice. He gets himself sent off early for not late after the whistle, but late developing in the play, dirty and what would have been a penalized backside hit on linebacker Chance Campbell on, I believe it was a Tyjae Spears end around or screen run play. It was a ball in Tyjae Spears' hands near the boundary, and Jamarco Jones rather violent. I mean, because you got to understand, we are in pads, but it's not live tackling right now, right? It's a lot of mock tackling. It's, you drop a shoulder on a guy and you pop pads, but nobody's going to the ground. I've not seen somebody fully take somebody to the ground wrapped up in a proper form tackle. And so that's not really the realm that we're in. It's kind of, we're in the middle zone of live drills. And so when a guy lays a block like that on somebody that lays them out, it catches your attention. And it's a moment of like, whoa. And sometimes it's a good thing. Sometimes it's like, well, okay, throw a little energy in there. I like it. Pop pads a little bit harder next time. Let's see it. Maybe the other guy that got thrown needs to put a little more effort in. That was not the case here. It was a blind side block that resulted in the laying out of Chance Campbell and Arden Key, Aziz Al-Shaair. I believe it was either Aziz or Arden. One of the 2 were on the field, and they were rather displeased with this activity. And they let Jamarco Jones and the offense know that they were rather displeased that Jones was not taking care of his teammates, which you got to take care of your teammates, man. Like, that's the whole point. We don't do that. We talked to Mike Vrabel about that block, about that hit after practice, between the end of practice and Jamarco Jones ultimately being waived. He said that that's something that definitely falls into that dumb shit category, or he didn't say that exactly, but that's what he was alluding to. He said that it was absolutely something that would have been penalized in a game. We don't want to practice that way. You got to take better care of your teammates, et cetera, et cetera. And so he was very critical of that decision. And then after he was critical of that decision in the press conference, less than 2 hours later, Jamarco Jones is unemployed. He is out of a job and blows a golden opportunity to win that right tackle spot to start the season. So where does this leave the Titans? Cutting Jones, waiving Jones, it saves the Titans about $2 million, a little bit over $2 million in cap savings. And in terms of who's going to play that right tackle position now, the list was thin. It's a lot thinner now because the guy that we thought was the best bet is gone. Chris Hubbard, the journeyman gadget swing tackle that they brought in instead of George Fant recently, who has not played the position in a number of years. He was the guy the past 2 days at practice when Jamarco Jones got himself in trouble with dumb anger management issues that would then assume all of those first team snaps. And so he's gotten a lot of them, and he's about to get a lot more, I'd imagine, considering the circumstances. But he is a guy that is on the older side. He's a guy that is on the side of inexperience, at least recently, has not played a lot of that position. And so there's certainly concern there. It's a pretty dire situation. Even more dire, the possibility of Andrew Rupchich, who, if you're saying, who is that? That's a fair point to make. Who is that indeed? A guy that has not really done anything in his NFL career. And then rookies, Jalen Duncan, 6th rounder, who we have determined both as a prospect and with my own 2 eyeballs at camp, this guy is not close to ready. He is a guy with a lot of potential And we said that coming out, and we thought it was a nice pick as a developmental prospect. But developmental is the key word, and this guy cannot go on the field this season to play at a starting tackle position. There's just no way. His play strength is poor. His technique is poor. He needs a lot of polish before he may end up becoming a finished product in the NFL in the future. John Njoku, Boise State tackle that was an undrafted free agent in this year's draft, he was our pick early on as kind of the dark horse. I know our buddy Stoney Keeley, who's listening in, is a big John Njoku fan, and so are we. But I don't know if it's a great thing that he is going to be, like, not that he's going to be, but the idea of him being your starting right tackle, JT, that sounds like kind of a nightmare situation for a prospect that we like, just not in this circumstance.
I mean, for sure. I think right now you have to look at it, and you're currently kind of in a position where it seems like the veteran presence is going to win out, especially for these first 6 games. I think definitely, even with Jalen Duncan kind of not being ready for the field, whatever, even if Njoku is like looking the part, I think you still go with a veteran guy over just someone who is very raw and unexperienced.
Yeah, I agree. It's a difficult choice, and it makes you wonder, well, okay, maybe the Titans go out and get somebody. The top of the market was kind of George Fant and Chris Hubbard, my friend.
Yeah.
Like that's
and I did tweet out when I saw this. I really don't think they make this move if they aren't confident in Chris Hubbard or Andrew Rupchich or maybe one of these other guys. Like I really find it hard to, because you obviously are trying to compete this year. And even if it is a character issue and something that you do not, I feel like at some point it just outweighs kind of the necessity of someone like Jamarco Jones to play. It kind of outweighs his character issue that he's having. And it just feels like to me that you don't do that unless you are confident that one of these guys can do just as good of a job as Jamarco Jones.
Well, 100% I get your logic and I understand where you're coming from. But I was talking to Tyler Rowland on Twitter over at Locked on Titans about this pretty much 20 minutes before the news came out that he was losing his job. And he was quote tweeting the video of Mike Vrabel talking about the hit and talking about Jamarco Jones. And he essentially said, to paraphrase, this guy looks like he's fed up with Jamarco Jones. And he said that Tyler is also upset with and fed up with Jamarco Jones, like, get him out of here. And I replied, I understand that. And I get that it seems like he's fed up with them, but they also continue to give the guy first team reps at the beginning of practices. So, like, I don't know, man, and yet they continue to do that. And then that news comes out. And so 20 minutes later, he quote tweets that tweet of mine and says, and yet, and I'm like, you know what? Yes. Yeah. This is where the bottom line meets desperation, because his point was like, they continue to give him first team reps because of the desperation of the situation. And I agreed. But at some point, desperation has to run into the brick wall that is the bottom line. And this is that wall, I think. And so I do wonder, because again, after Tuesday and him losing all those first team reps and the behavioral issue, it would have made perfect sense for today him to be back out there, but with the second or third team guys, you have to re-earn that first team rep. And they put him back out there immediately with the first team reps. And so that's a situation where I think they were between a rock and a hard place, and they may have decided, you know what? It may not be in the best interest talent-wise of this team for him to not be here. But if in the first week of padded practice, before actual tackling, before you're facing opponents that actually dislike you, because you're playing your own team, like, these defenders aren't talking a bunch of nonsense to you, and it's not personal, and they don't actually hate you. Like, they're just playing around, If he can't control his temper in consecutive days in this situation, how can we expect him to not maybe be the best talent available at tackle in September, but how can we expect him not to get 3 massive back-breaking penalties because he can't control himself on the field? And I think that's what that ultimately came down to. Let's move on to 2 more topics from today's training camp that I want to touch on, and then some Titans news from JT, and then we'll get out of here. The first of which is well, let's start with this, the field turf. I want to mention briefly. We talked about this in the spring when the news came out. The Titans would be going at Nissan Stadium from regular field grass, regular grass on the field to field turf, artificial surface that they'd be installing this offseason. It was my understanding that they installed it in the spring, although JT, you actually been there. It's working some of the games or working some of the practices. Gosh, working some of the what's the word? Concerts. Thank you for the summer. They're not all out there on the grass, right? So does the grass come up in sections? You think it's
most likely? I mean,
okay.
there really is no grass right there now. I think it is.
I saw a picture from somebody that worked. Like I saw a private picture sent to me, somebody that works on the field crew of the new turf in like March. So I know it exists. I just don't think it's been out. I think they probably pulled it up. They're going to put it back down, but it's there. And it is a monofilament matrix helix turf, if I'm recalling correctly, with organic infill, a combination of cork and coconut, which if you want to go see that up close, I have pictures of that on my Twitter account, or my X account rather, at Easton Freeze, if you want to see that up close, because it's the same surface they have installed in the Titans bubble where we were for the majority of today's practice. And it is, I want to mention, if people had forgotten about that, like a reminder, they'll be on turf this year. But also, after having some time today, and it was not my first time in there, but my first time for a long practice in there, after having some time to stand around on it for an extended period of time, move around on it, I, like a goober, ran around a little bit on it just to kind of like feel what it felt like. And I'm not wearing cleats, obviously. And then I talked to my buddies, Austin Stanley, and who else was I talking to? Austin Stanley and somebody else. We were talking about the way that it feels, and we all kind of agreed, like, this kind of just sucks. Like it's makes your knees kind of hurt after a while. It just is a weird surface. And I said, you know, I've always been a staunch believer that not all natural grass is good grass, but all fake grass is bad grass. And so I kind of think that is the Stoney says that he loves the visual of Easton out there running routes to provide more thorough journalism to us. That's what I'm here for, Stoney. I'm trying to give you the real insight that you're looking for and embarrass myself in front of professional athletes in the process. But yeah, I remain highly skeptical the players aren't going to hate this. I'll believe it when I see it, JT. I know you and I will both probably have an opportunity to get out there at some point at the beginning of the season. We'll be at Nissan Stadium and see how things go. I'm not saying it'll be ACL City everywhere, but I'm not saying that they're not going to secretly hate it. I'm not saying it may not lead to some injuries that are make you wonder a little bit, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it definitely will be interesting because once one ACL happens, you know, it's just like the immediate reaction, either one way or the other. It's going to be very, very immediate.
Yeah, no, I agree. All right. Last topic before some odds and ends. I want to talk about two offensive players that are making me think, JT, and I want your help on this because I want us to kind of just talk this math out again, like we did in the warm up today. There are two players that I continue to watch at practice that are making me think a lot about the 53-man roster and the skill positions that will make this roster. JT, I was in the car a lot yesterday traveling, and while I was doing as a passenger, and I was on my phone just kind of fiddling around with if I was making a 53-man roster projection, which I plan to do at some point in the next week or so, what would it look like right now based on what I've seen? And these two guys were stumping me. It's wide receiver Reggie Roberson Jr. and tight end Alize Mack. That if the 53-man roster came out today, which it does not, doesn't come out for another month or so, but if it came out today, I would be shocked to see either of these guys not on that list based on what we've seen from them in practice. Now, that might come as a shock to many because they are certainly not amongst the locks to make the roster, and they are arguably not amongst the guys that were really pressing to make this roster even a week ago. We were talking a lot about how maybe they keep just 5 wide receivers. Maybe they got Treylon Burks and DeAndre Hopkins and Kyle Phillips and W.I. and Chris Moore. We agree. All 5 of those guys, they're making this team, right? There's just no two ways about it. And so the debate was maybe there's a 6th receiver, and if so, it's like 7 guys fighting for one position. I think if there's a sixth receiver right now, it's him. And we'd been talking about Colton Dowell for a lot of the spring and summer as a guy that was probably going to get that spot just because of the draft capital and his circumstances, his situation. Man, I think it's gonna be a tough decision for them if they do go with the sixth guy between Reggie Roberson and Colton Dowell. I mean, just pulling up my notes from camp from the past 2 days, Reggie Roberson, I think he has 4 touchdowns in 2 practices, and they've been really impressive. He is a speed guy. I think he's I think that unless he blows up down the stretch here at camp, I think he has successfully killed Racing McMath's chances of making this roster because Roberson is not as fast as McMath, but it certainly is that speed prototype. He also is a much better tackler than McMath is. And for that reason, as well as a couple of other different technical details of his game, he makes for a better special teamer than Racing McMath does. Roberson, you can actually put on special teams. McMath is kind of not really a special teams guy. And so I kind of think that he's going to be that guy, and it makes it interesting. Do you put, they may have to put Colton Dowell on the practice squad and just hope they can continue to develop him. Roberson also, I was listening to Paul Kaharski's podcast here on the 440 network the other day, and he was talking about how people kind of forget this. Roberson at, I think he was SMU, if I'm not mistaken, wherever he was at in college, he tore his ACL in 2020 and missed the season. Now, last season, he was a full season removed from that ACL. So he'd played he'd already played the year back, right? He was on the year after the year back. But as we know with ACL injuries, JT, depending on the severity, depending on the complications, and depending a lot on the timing during that season, how quickly a player comes back really, really can vary dramatically. I'm not saying last season the reason why he wasn't this impressive in training camp is because of that, but I am saying it may have been because this is a different looking guy in camp. And maybe it's just that it's a second year and he's developed and he's really worked on his game and yada, yada, yada. But whatever the case may be, he looks like a guy that's pressing to make the roster. And then Alize Mack, we liked him a lot as just a flyer that the Titans took out of the XFL, a guy that in the spring played a full season of professional football and is just chugging right along into training camp. So if he makes the roster, he's going to have played like a calendar year of contact football, which sounds like a horrible decision for your body, a horrible thing to do to yourself, but props for being able to do that. I would be dead after one game. He's going to go like 32 in a row if he makes the team. And he's somebody that continues to make significant progress. And pretty much every single day at camp, he is grabbing our attention with some phenomenal play. In the 7-on-7, or excuse me, I think it was the 11s, regardless, during team drills today, marching down the field, Will Levis looked like crap during one series, and he was working with some guys that were not giving him any help, but he was not making good throws at all, overthrowing guys, dirtying the ball, being indecisive. And it was 4th down, incomplete. Mike Vrabel throws a very convenient face mask on the defense penalty, which was essentially a phantom face mask because I want to extend this drive because I want to see my rookie quarterback try again. And so on the next play of the new gifted series, he just threads the needle through I think 3 different defenders' hands to Alize Mack at the boundary, manages to contort his body to catch this ball and then keep his feet in bounds. And it was one of those whoa plays down the field from a receiving tight end, a big bodied athletic guy where you go, whoa. And we were talking to his tight end position coach, Tony Dews, this morning about Alize Mack and what he brings to the potential roster. And I asked Tony, we know what he can do as a receiver. That's what he did in the XFL to garner the attention of NFL teams and make an NFL roster again. And he's a guy that's bounced around the NFL in the past and then went to the XFL and is now back in the NFL ranks. What is it about him as a blocker that you think could make him an asset to the team? And he was very complimentary of the fact that, hey, this is a guy that is big and athletic. And as we know, what is maybe the biggest and most athletic position on the field? It's edge rushers. And so that's what tight ends need to be able to hang with. And this is a guy now, Alize Mack, that he thinks his physical skill set may allow for him to do just that. And so he may have a role as a blocker on this team. So for those 2 players, JT, let's widen the scope and talk about the grand scheme of these rosters. I'm going to pull up the list that I had made the other day, just preliminary of the 53-man rosters. Knowing the Titans track record, their history with how they construct their skill position list, it's oftentimes 5-5-5, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends. Sometimes it's, you get a sixth receiver. Sometimes it's a seventh. Sometimes you only keep 4 running backs or 4 tight ends, but that's basically what they like to do on paper, not knowing the group. Here are the guys that are locks, right? In the wide receiver core, we know the top 5, right? Okay, we got those guys down. Tight ends, Chigakonkwo, obviously. Trayvon Wesco as the glorified lineman. We think that he's making the roster. Josh Wiley, the rookie, he's probably making the roster. Like, it'd be kind of surprising if he didn't. And then it comes down to 2 guys as that 4th and 5th tight end. Alize Mack, who's much more a receiver, and then Kevin Rader, who has been doing some more receiving in practice this season, but is absolutely in that Trayvon Wesco mold of he's a big-bodied blocker. Mike Herndon liked to talk about him on tape a lot last year when he got in there as a guy that's like underrated. Maybe he does what Jeff Swaim does better than Jeff Swaim. Like, that's kind of the deal with him. Then at the running back position, you got Derrick Henry and Tyjae Spears, obviously. And then 3 guys in Jonathan Ward, Hassan Haskins, who's legally embattled, and Julius Chestnut. If we include all the guys I just mentioned, that's 6 receivers, 5 running backs, and 5 tight ends. And maybe that's what happens. But I kind of think one of those guys has to hit the cutting room floor. And the guys on that bubble are Jonathan Ward, Julius Chestnut, Hassan Haskins at the receiving position. And then it is Reggie Roberson at the wide receiver position. And the tight end position, it's Alize Mack and Kevin Rader. So let's go one position at a time, JT, and just give our preliminary guesses. At the running back position, do you think they keep 4 or 5 guys? And in either case, who do you think makes the list? And if it's 4, who gets cut?
I mean, for the running back position, I think it is 4. Just like most logically, what happens here.
Is Haskins one of those 4?
I don't think so. I think Haskins.
I don't either.
I think Haskins is the one, and not because he's not a bad player. I think that with Jamarco Jones, it's just like this is a team that very much does not want anything on the outside. And if obviously they're going to let due process play out in the legal system, but if it comes back in all light of an issue, I think he's gone. Which then leaves Jonathan Ward and Julius Chestnut as the last 4 there. Now, if it does come back and Hassan Haskins is kind of cleared,
right?
I think there's a decent chance that maybe they choose between Jonathan Ward and Julius Chestnut, in which I think Julius Chestnut is probably on the chopping block there and is on the cutting room floor.
I think the same thing, JT, but based on the way they use these guys, like we as media and fans, like it feels obvious that Ward is the better player right now. But the team seems to like Chestnut more. And I don't know why. They kind of do the same thing. They seem to like Chestnut more. But I'm with you. Like, if it weren't for the legal embattlement of Haskins, he would make the team, right? Because he's so different. He is country mile best blocking running back in that group. Best guy for third down pass only situations. He's also easily the best special teamer in that group, one of the best on the team. So his skill set's really unique. But it feels like, assuming these top 4 guys, and Henry, Spears, Ward, and Chestnut, don't give them a reason to not keep them on the roster, this may be a situation where, we don't know for sure what the deal is with Haskins, but the easiest way for us to just cut ties is, just say, what, he wasn't good enough to make the cut. This is an easy out for us as a team. We'll move on. Doesn't that sound about right to you?
Yeah, I think so. But obviously, I think they are just going to give it due process. So, and if it comes to that, I think they probably keep 5, and then obviously it's you move on to like the tight end position. I think is the next position you'd move to.
Right, and the tight end position is interesting because you could keep 5. One could argue that's too many in Okonkwo, Wesco, Wiley, Mack, and Rader. If you got to just keep 4, the 2 on the block there are Mack and Rader, and there is a big difference between what I would do and what I think is the correct decision, and what my cynical brain thinks the Titans would do, knowing their MO. Obviously, what I think they should do and what the correct option is Alize Mack has earned this job. He is a stud in training camp. Now, maybe it's a false flag. Maybe it's not real. In training camp, there's a lot of, you see ghosts sometimes. The ghost of Mason Kinsey was a big deal 10 seconds ago in training camp, and we all know how that turned out, right? But I don't think that's the case with this guy. I think he can actually be a nice depth asset. On the other side of the coin, what the Titans tend to do And what my cynical brain thinks they will do is say, we are big man, caveman football. Ooga booga, give me Kevin Rader. I need blocking tight end. What do you expect them to do if they have to come down to picking one or the other?
I think in the wild card and all of this caveman talk here is something that the Titans tight end coach kind of talked to today about Josh Whyle and how they think he's a talented receiver, but they're starting to work a lot more on his blocking. And
cool.
And if you have Trayvon Wesco, who you clearly brought in to replace Jeff Swaim, you're working on Josh Whyle to be a dual threat. It feels like you have, okay, if we're working on Josh Whyle being a dual threat that can also be a plus blocker, it feels like those are our two guys who are blocker first, but can also receive. And then you have two guys in Chig and Alize Mack to be our tight ends who are going to be dynamic and able to make plays up the field. And I think that's where I would go personally. Now, of course, you are totally right that it is the way this team works through the run game.
It wouldn't shock you one bit, would it?
It would not shock me if they kept 4 and it was Chig, Wesco, Whyle, and Rader.
Right. I'm not mad. I'm just disappointed would be the circumstances there. So last question on this topic before we move out of here. If I told you they have to get, and they could keep 16 tight ends, running backs, and receivers and keep all of these guys, they could. But if I told you they got to keep 14 of them, and we're going to go ahead, I think we kind of agreed, let's keep Hassan Haskins out. We think he's not making the team. There's 4 running backs, okay? You got to get 10 receivers and tight ends, whether that's 6 receivers and 4 tight ends or 5 and 5. Who's the guy you're cutting? Is it Kevin Rader? Is it Alize Mack? Or is it
Reggie Roberson?
Reggie Roberson. Thank you.
Thinking with my head, not the narrative. It's Alize Mack, I think.
If you're saying you're trying to predict the list, that's your prediction.
If I'm predicting it, I think it's Alize Mack.
Me too. What would you do if you were the GM?
Like I said, I think
audio's Kevin Rader. Yeah,
I think the tight end coach, his name is escaping my mind right now.
Tony Dews.
Tony Dews. But talking kind of about the versatility they're trying to bring with Whyle, I think there's no reason to keep 3 blocking tight ends on a roster in general. Like in any football club, but if there is a football team
in the NFL,
if there's a football team that will keep 3 basically glorified linemen, it's the Titans.
Well, and you have to consider of those 3 guys, you got to put one, Roberson, Mack, Rader. You got to put one on the practice squad and cross your fingers they're still available if you need them later. It's got to be Rader, right? He's the one least likely to get picked up, don't you think?
I mean, you never know. There's a guy out there named Monty Ossenfort who just loves signing old Titans right. Like
Arthur
Dennis
Smith
Bailey.
Still exists. He's still around. Dadgummit.
Jeff Swaim. So, like anything can happen.
Anything can happen. All right, a couple odds and ends from today's practice before we get to the news with producer JT. Kicking battle update. It was a perfect day for Caleb Shudak out there. He hit from 33 twice and then 40, 42, 46, 48, and a 52-yard kick that, I'm not going to lie, I dropped my jaw on that one because that John was good from 62. I mean, this thing, he put it through the uprights, and if you were just looking at the field goal posts and where the ball crossed, you'd have been like, what was that, from 41? No, my friend, that was from 52. I don't know how he got a hold of that ball, but he got a hold of that ball, and it was a very impressive one. So another perfect day for Shudak. All I'll say on the kicking battle, and I'll continue to say, as long as both of these guys continue to miss 0 or 1 kicks per day in camp, it's ultimately going to come down to those two going back and forth in the preseason games. Who can do it in a game situation with a live bullet being thrown at them? And then, if that's still a tie, I think JT, you and I agree. I think tie goes to the runner here, and the runner is the big guy, and the big guy is our boy Trey Wolf. Wolfpack stand up. I think that they will defer to him if it's a true tie, and it will not be fair to Caleb Shudak. It will not be fair because I think there's a very real circumstance where he does everything in his power to win this job, and he is perfect, and it does not matter. They just defer to the extra power of Trey Wolf, and that's kind of where I see this maybe potentially ending up. Is that kind of what you're feeling?
I mean, yeah, but with all this kind of talk about the philosophicals of the Tennessee Titans and how they run their team, it feels like maybe
with the intention of frustrating fans.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it feels like since Caleb has maybe been around here a little longer and kind of
seniority card.
Maybe, I mean, with
Yeah,
just like
no, I mean,
the Titans they like guys in practice and during training camp. They like guys who get the culture. And I mean,
Mason Kinsey Hive, stand up.
Literally, like,
yeah,
it's like Caleb Shudak has been there for a year. And if it is a tie, like just thinking from a Titans front office perspective, I don't see why they wouldn't keep Shudak in that situation. And like, I still am like Trey Wolf, because I just think the Wolfpack is like a fun name and that could be really cool this season. And like, I think you are right. He has the more power.
He is bigger and stronger. It's just,
but I mean, Shudak's been here. So
it's true. And that's going to be it for the notes of mine from training camp. So let's get to some Titans news with producer JT, and then we'll get on out of here.
Yeah, so one of the big things that occurred a little bit late last night, the Titans agreed to terms with center Jimmy Murray. And in doing this, they have waived receiver Jacob Copeland. Two things on this real quick. One, going and trying to look up stats on Jimmy Murray, there are none. He has never played a offensive snap in the NFL, which kind of blows my mind considering that I thought Jacob Copeland had a little bit of upside. But clearly
we both did. Yeah.
But clearly they will take the depth, even if that depth has never proven itself at the NFL level. Because obviously they believe that guys like Reggie Roberson and Racey McMath and Colton Dow have something better to prove here at camp.
Well, this surprised us both last night when we saw it, because even before he was drafted by the Titans, we were talking about Copeland as like, maybe he's a draftable player. Like, I don't hate his game as just a receiving prospect in this draft. JT, I'm pretty much certain at this point that this was not at all a reflection on Jimmy Murray, the center. No disrespect to Jimmy, but like, who, like, you know what? This is a reflection of just how disposable they felt Jacob Copeland is. Because we asked today, Mike Vrabel, friend of the show, Nick Suss, asked what it was about Jimmy Murray that made them want to bring him in. And Vrabel basically said, we've got 3 quarterbacks right now. We would like 3 different line units with 3 different centers. And so essentially just said we needed a body. And we went with the, so without saying it, he essentially said we needed a body and we had to get rid of a body. And so we found the most dispensable guy on the roster, and it sounds like the most dispensable guy on the roster was Jacob Copeland. So clearly he had not making the impression that we thought he would make in that room. And I guess it had to be either him or Kieran Jackson to pop, and it's been Jackson so far for sure.
Yeah, moving on here, having to do with the AFC South rival Houston Texans. Their center, Scott Quessenberry, had torn his ACL and MCL earlier today. A league source confirmed. So he is out for the season, which means a guy that we talked about in the past, Juice Scruggs out of Penn State, will now kind of be in the limelight here to step up.
Yeah, rookie Juice Scruggs, member of the all-name team, a guy that we really liked as a prospect coming out in this year's draft, was already battling, from what I understand, in Texans camp for that starter job, and I think he was the one kind of leading that battle. Like, he was ultimately on track to earn that job, but whether he is ready or not now, he's going to be thrust into that starting center position, you'd imagine, for the Texans. So somewhat significant news for an AFC South rival.
Moving on, former Titans safety Joshua Kalu worked out for the Steelers this morning. The two sides did not immediately reach a deal per league sources, but just another notable name with another team.
A guy that, if he doesn't work out for the Steelers, would not be a horrible reunion candidate for the Titans, because we know that the safety position here, little on the thin side. I know our buddy Justin Mello has written multiple times, hey, Josh Kalu's still out there. Maybe go get Josh Kalu just as like a body, because if you run out of the 3 guys you have, you are really up Schitt's Creek.
Yeah, two other things before we get out of here. The Colts had tried out a number of running backs yesterday, including Kenyon Drake,
That's crazy.
Benny Snell, and Divine Ozigbo. 2 or 3 guys there that, I mean...
2 guys you know and 1 you don't.
It doesn't move the needle, but clearly they are desperate for some help. And then one final running back note here.
And by the way, I saw a report, an additional report just a moment before we hopped on the show, that a number of Colts executives have gone behind the scenes off the record and talked about how they are very much open to the idea of trading Jonathan Taylor. Now, we've talked about how we don't think there's a trade that exists out there unless they're willing to take very, very little. But maybe they're willing to take very, very little. Something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and then finally, it was reported earlier this week that Sony Michel has retired. But with him retiring, of course, he had an interesting up and down career with a number of teams, but you had a little tidbit here that you wanted to share. Yes.
Yeah. I texted you and said, I need you to report on Sony Michel retiring, not because it's super relevant or super new, but I found this at NFL_memes on Twitter. So super reliable source, but it's true. I fact checked this. Stetson Bennett, who was for a brief period of time Sony Michel's Rams teammate, was previously his teammate when they were on the same team together at Georgia. Sony Michel, of course, retired this week. So that means that Sony Michel was drafted in the first round of the NFL draft, played for 4 different NFL teams, won 2 Super Bowl rings, and then retired, all while Stetson Bennett was still in college. So shout out to our 5th year, 6th year, 7th year king, super senior himself, Stetson Bennett, for being the eternal 30-year-old college man who finally has graduated to the NFL. Shout out to him.
Yeah, for sure. And that's going to do it for our news today.
All right, that's producer JT with the news, and that is it for our show today. Thank you to everyone for tuning in. Thank you to producer JT for not killing me for going way over his prescribed hard out. I expected him to just dip out randomly at any moment, and he didn't. He stuck with it. That shows his dedication to the show. I won't make it too long here at the end. Make sure to rate, review, and subscribe to us. Follow us on all socials at Hot Read Pod on Twitter and Instagram and TikTok. We are partnered now with Zen Sportsbook. So if you want to get into the newest sports betting platform in the state of Tennessee,
Browns plus 1.5 tonight.
Browns plus 1.5 tonight, baby, on Zen Sportsbook. Use code HOTPOD, HOTPOD. When you sign up, that's the referral code you got to use. HOTPOD, HOTPOD. With Zen Sportsbook, you get 5% welcome bonus cash back in your pocket for the first 15 days, and then 3% cash back bonus in your pocket, win or lose, 3% on all of your betting volume forever. That's an awesome deal, and you can only get it if you use code HOTPOD, HOTPOD, when you sign up with Zen Sportsbook. That's going to be it from us this week. Hope you guys enjoyed. We'll be back with another week of training camp coverage and maybe some guests to come along. I know our buddy Nick Suss talked to me today about potentially coming on the show next week, and we love talking to him, so maybe he'll stop by. We'll be back with a 3-show week again, starting first thing Monday morning. Until then, for producer JT, I'm your host, Easton Freeze. This has been the Hot Read Podcast, and we'll talk to you next week.